Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Rescued by Her Bear by Felicity Heaton. Narrated by Elizabeth Hart and Troy Duran. Chapter 1. Cameo couldn't believe the turn her life had taken. Being on the run from a drug cartel had not been in her binder, but apparently she couldn't plan everything that was going to happen to her. She swallowed her desire to curse as she kept her eyes fixed on her boots, carefully watching her footing as she navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of the narrow dirt trail that cut through the forest, hugging the base of a steep white mountain. Even though she tried to keep her focus on not falling into the pines and firs that lined the slope to her right, part of it kept drifting to behind her. She tensed and froze as a sound echoed through the forest, and she imagined someone was there, closing in on her. Her heart lodged in her throat, hammering there, and her breaths came faster, fogging in the chilly air. She resisted the urge to hurry onwards and started slowly moving again. Rushing was a surefire way of making herself trip, and if she fell and hurt herself out here, only one of three things was going to happen. She would freeze to death, one of the local predators would eat her, or the men she was sure were following her would catch her. Cameo breathed hard as the trail narrowed even further and sharply began to ascend to a part of the forest where the trees were sparser and the snow had been able to settle on the ground. She held back another curse. This wasn't good. Her breath misted in the air in front of her face as she picked her way over a tangled root that crossed the path, gripped a whip-thin sapling with her left hand, and eased along a section of trail that had a sharp downwards angle to it that made her feel the mountain was determined to hurl her off it. Sweat dampened her brow beneath her thick woolen hat, irritating her. She wanted to wipe it away, but she wasn't about to remove her gloves. The temperature was declining rapidly as the afternoon wore on, and she couldn't afford to lose any more of her body heat. She wasn't sure she would be able to light a fire to warm up when it got too dark for her to continue. They might see it. They might find her. Cameo wasn't sure how they had caught up with her. Back in Banff, she had been sure she had lost them, had started to relax while stocking up on supplies, and had even spent the night in a motel. But then a red SUV had tailed her rental to the outskirts of the town and hadn't left her rear view for close to 50 miles. When she had taken a precautionary detour to prove to herself that she was just being jittery and she wasn't being followed, the SUV had remained on her tail. Cameo had panicked and tried to lose them, had made it far enough ahead of them that they would have lost sight of her on the winding highway, and had turned down another road. She had picked a doozy. The road she had thought would lead her north towards another main road had led her to what amounted to little more than a forestry track. Recent tire tracks had given her hope that she would find a cabin somewhere at the end of it, some place where she could call for help, even when she hated the thought of pulling anyone into danger. When she had reached the end of the track, there had been several vehicles parked there, all of them covered in snow. Cameo had parked her car next to them, dressed quickly for the weather and grabbed her backpack, and hadn't stuck around. She had headed into the mountains, following a trail at first, but she lost it somewhere in the woods as a storm had closed in and had ended up taking a quick break to check the map in her pack. She had checked her position on her GPS 5 times and had eventually ended up cursing. It turned out that the valley she had picked only had one building marked on it, and it was across the other side of the valley, miles from where she was. She breathed a sigh of relief when she found a trail that led downwards before she reached the snow line, following that instead and remained on guard, listening for signs of life in the forest. There had to be someone living out here. Those cars had been there for some time, and the footprints in the snow had led in this direction, not towards the other side of the valley. She glanced up the mountain. Maybe if she could climb a little higher, where she could see above the tops of the trees, she might be able to spot a cabin nearby. Probably not. Snow whizzed across the mountain, obscuring the peak of it, and the storm was only getting worse. Soon it would be a blizzard. Climbing higher to see anything in this weather was not only dangerous, but pointless. She wouldn't be able to see a few feet in front of her face. Cameo rubbed her right arm, trying to keep the chill off it as the wind buffeted her, and snow bit into her face as the gale drove it through the trees. Her thick dark green coat and black pants had been made for this weather, but she still felt the bitter bite of the cold. Her toes were numb in her waterproof boots, despite the thermal fleece that lined them, and her fingers felt ready to fall off. She looked up as the light began to fade and told herself that she didn't need to be worried when a jolt of fear jangled her veins and chilled her blood. Bears would be asleep at this time of year, although that left her with wolves and cougars to worry about. She chuckled mirthlessly. And humans. She looked back over her shoulder, peering into the gloomy forest, trying to see past the snow that made it through the canopy, falling in great chunks in places as wind shook the pines. She sent up a silent prayer that she had been mistaken, even when she knew she wasn't. It was them. The same men who had threatened her. Maybe they would keep going on the highway or not think to check the road she had taken. Maybe they were right on her tail, hidden just beyond that ridge she could see. How was she going to get out of this one? If she kept going, she was only moving deeper into dangerous territory. She didn't have enough food to keep her alive for long, although the cold would probably kill her before hunger did. If she didn't keep going, there was a chance the men would catch her, and that didn't bear thinking about. She should call the authorities. But part of her was still convinced that was a wrong move and would end with her being in more trouble than she was right now. The cartel, or whatever they called themselves, had made it clear that her parents would end up just like her brother if she spoke with anyone. She couldn't keep going like this, though. Even if she evaded them, eventually they would catch her, or worse, they would go after her parents to make her give herself up. She fished her phone from her pocket and checked it, her hand shaking as the screen lit up. No signal. Calling for help wasn't an option after all. She tried to stop herself, but her thumb moved to the messages and pressed on the icon, and sickness rolled through her as she opened one of them. Cameo stared at the picture they had sent her, one that had made her vomit when she had first seen it, still terrified and tormented her now. Nate, her younger brother, was unrecognizable in it, slumped in a chair with his arms bound behind his back, covered in blood, dead. She couldn't let that happen to her parents. Wouldn't let that happen to her. Cameo closed the message and shoved the phone back in the pocket of her salopettes, shifting the canister of bear spray that hung from her belt aside. She paused and leaned against one of the towering pines, breathing hard as she struggled not to vomit. When they had sent that photograph to her, she had been convinced it was some sort of terrible joke, the kind her brother would play on her. When two men had shown up at her door and threatened her, she had realized it was real. Nate was dead, and now the cartel he had worked for was after her. All because he had told them she had the money they wanted. She didn't. Her brother had always been a wild card, had always done crazy things, the complete opposite of her as he had rolled with the punches and seen where the wind would blow him. But she had honestly thought he had put that life behind him. When he had moved from the small, sleepy hamlet where they had grown up on the East Coast to busy Vancouver 8 years ago, she had loved having him nearby, had visited him often at first. But then her job as a park ranger had taken her out of the city and into the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Cameo had thought he had been doing well. And then he had come to visit her with some of his friends and had tried to convince her to use her connections as a ranger to help them move drugs across the border, whether it was by land or sea. She should have seen then how desperate he was, trying to prove his worth to the neatly dressed thugs he had brought with him. As a ranger, she came across her fair share of illegally planted pot in the forests up in the mountains. But what her brother had been involved in was something else, and he had been in deep. Before she could find a way to get him out, he had gotten himself killed, and the people he had worked for had come after her, demanding she pay them the $300,000 her brother owed them. Cameo turned and sagged against the tree, her breath leaving her on a sigh that turned to mist in front of her face. And she had discovered who had gotten Nate involved in such a shady business in the first place. Carl. Her ex. The ex. The only man she had ever really fallen in love with. It had broken her heart when she had put an end to things between them when her application to become a ranger, something she had always wanted to be, had been accepted. Carl had refused to come with her across the country. He had expected her to give up her dream, had been angry when she had refused. Things between them had ended on a bad note, and now it was all the worse. Now she was running for her life, fearing her parents might be doing the same. The message Carl had sent had made it clear that if she didn't get them the money, what had happened to Nate would happen to her parents. Cameo had immediately messaged her father and told them to head to the remote cabin they owned close to Moose Lake, one that had been in the family for generations. She didn't think Carl knew about it. She had certainly never told him. And then she had gone on the run. She frowned as darkness closed in around her, as the temperature dropped sharply, and tilted her head back as she stepped away from the tree, peering up through the dense canopy to the sky. The clouds were lower now, thick and heavy. It looked like more snow was coming. Just great. Just her luck. At this rate, even the forest floor would be covered in a deep layer of it. She debated whether to keep moving or to stop for the night. She had a flashlight so she could find her way, but darkness wasn't the thing she was worried about. It was the local wildlife. A flashlight wasn't going to scare off wolves or a hungry cougar if they were prowling around in this storm, desperate to eat. Fire was her better option. Plus, she was cold to the bone now, and hungry. If she didn't rest, she would probably collapse somewhere out there in the dark. Resting and eating were worth the risk of being spotted. It was important she keep her strength up. Maybe, if she was lucky, the men wouldn't come, and in the morning she could circle her way back to her car and check it out from a distance to make sure it wasn't being watched. She scoured the forest, trying to find a good spot to set up camp. Maybe her luck was changing for the better. There was a hollow beneath the sprawling roots of a fallen tree. It would provide shelter from the blizzard and make it harder for predators to sneak up on her. Cameo shrugged out of her heavy pack and set it down inside the small earth cave. Her stiff fingers made opening it hard work, but she managed it and pulled out everything she needed for a small fire. She had come prepared, had packed everything she might need to survive in the wild before she had left home. Protein bars, her water-purifying bottle, thermal layers, spare gloves and another scarf, crampons for her boots, even her sleeping bag and bedroll. At least life as a ranger had prepared her for surviving while on the run in the mountains. She gathered what dry wood she could find and made a fire just at the mouth of the earth cave, lit it and watched smoke rise lazily in the air and catch on the wind that carried it south. The fire flickered and guttered, almost going out as a stronger breeze swept around her, but it sprang back to life as the direction of the wind changed again, coming from directly behind the cave. Cameo grabbed a protein bar from her pack and closed it again, turned the bag and used it as a seat. She stared at the fire as she ate and sipped her water, savored the warmth of the flames as they flickered and danced. Hopefully it would be enough to deter the predators. If it wasn't, then she would use her bear spray. She fished her phone out of her pocket again and looked at the message from her father. The last few dozen messages were the same. A heart he sent every morning to let her know that they were fine. She had missed sending one back to him this morning and hoped he wasn't worried about her. She set up a heart in a message and added, bad signal and pressed the send button. It would go when she had signal, and hopefully it would ease her parents' minds. She pocketed her phone and huddled down into her coat and tried to stay awake. But fatigue rolled up on her, and her adrenaline crashed as silence stretched around her. She blinked as her eyelids slipped closed, widened her eyes and sucked down a breath, and then another, hoping the chilly air in her lungs would wake her up. It didn't. Sleep overcame her. When she woke, it was almost dark. She huffed and chastised herself, pushed to her feet and grimaced as her leg muscles cramped and ached. She stomped her feet to get some warmth back into them, hoping to wake herself up. Something behind her cracked. Her hand flew to her bear spray as she whirled to face the direction of the sound, her pulse skyrocketing as images of cougars or wolves filled her mind. It was worse. It turned out her luck wasn't getting better after all. She stared at the two men dressed in heavy black weatherproof gear, panic lancing her and flooding her veins with adrenaline that made her shake. The very thug she had thought had been tailing her. The one on the left checked his rifle over, his hazel eyes as cold as the snow that whipped through the trees around them. The one to the right smiled as he aimed a pistol at her.
"Hello, Cameo."
Chapter 2. Lowe kept pace with his twin brother Knox, following the snowy trail through the woods, his thoughts keeping him silent as they headed north towards the lodge near the glacier at the head of the valley. Something was wrong with their alpha, Saint. The big bear shifter was caught up in a female he had kidnapped from the neighboring cougars, had turned on Knox and then demanded he and Lowe get the lodge ready so he could move her there. If it had been summer, Lowe wouldn't have minded as much. Hell, if the weather had been clear, he wouldn't have minded as much. But it was blowing a gale and the snow was falling thick and fast, and even the forest didn't offer much protection from the storm. The snow had managed to work its way into the heart of the pines and formed a layer a few inches thick on the ground that made it hard going. He wasn't a cougar or a wolf, wasn't nimble on his feet like that breed of shifter. Maintaining his footing was requiring constant focus, and it was making him grouchy. Knox muttered things beneath his breath beside him, grumbling about Saint and the female. Lowe glanced across at his brother, reached out when the need to calm him became too great, and laid a gloved hand on his wide shoulders. Knox's stormy blue eyes slid to him, and then he huffed, faced forwards again and growled, "Can't see shit in this weather." Lowe knew the snow wasn't the reason Knox was in a foul mood. He wasn't happy about being sent away by Saint either, but he would do as his alpha ordered. He preferred to go with the flow rather than cause any aggravation, unlike Knox. Knox had wanted to fight Saint when he had ordered them to prepare the lodge, but Lowe had calmed him down. "Don't know how you can be so relaxed about this. It isn't right. Saint's head isn't on straight where this female is concerned." Knox rumbled and kicked at a fallen branch, sending it flying out of his way. Lowe smiled tightly. He might be calm on the surface, but his bear side was as grumpy as Knox. His more human side and his bear one had always been polar opposites. He wasn't sure that part of him knew how to be calm. It was always easily agitated, always alert, and right now it was uneasy. Something didn't feel right, and he wasn't talking about Saint and the cougar female now. He glanced around the woods, peering through the endless sea of trunks. Something didn't feel right in the valley. He couldn't put a name to it, but it had him on edge and had his bear side restless, constantly scanning the area trying to figure out what was wrong. He glanced at Knox again, torn between mentioning it and keeping it to himself. His younger brother would only shrug it off and put it down to Saint and their frigid trek to the lodge, and the fact they were all awake in the dead of winter. An image of his bed popped into his head, heavy with warm furs and stacked with soft pillows. He growled, aching to crawl under the layers of sheets and sleep. Beside him, Knox chuckled. "Thinking about somewhere warm and dry, too." Lowe nodded. "Maybe once we're done getting the place set up, we can bed down at the lodge." "Fuck, that sounds good." Knox rolled his shoulders and huffed again, his breath fogging in the air as he glared at the snow that made it through the trees and swirled towards them. His dark blonde eyebrows knitted hard. "Get out of this shit. Get the lodge ready, get a few drinks in us, maybe thaw a steak or two and hit the sack. Away from the noisy cougars." That sounded more than good. It sounded heavenly. Their noisy neighbors were the reason they were in this mess. Had woken him, Knox, and Saint from their winter sleep with some kind of pride celebration. Knox suspected it was a wedding. Well, if their alpha had anything to do with it, it was going ahead without one of the cougars. Saint hadn't exactly handled the rude awakening with decorum. The whole affair had agitated Lowe's bear side even further, and had irritated Knox to the point where he wasn't thinking straight. Lowe glanced at his brother, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He needed to calm Knox, to ease him down, and he knew just the way to do it. Lowe focused on mentally preparing those steaks in his head, trying to remember what they had in storage up at the lodge. There were 3 things his brother needed in order to relax, and all 3 awaited them at the quiet lodge. Steaks, whiskey, sleep. His bear side groaned at the latter. All he wanted to do was go back to bed, to sleep the winter away as he did every year. All he wanted was for things to remain peaceful at Black Ridge. But here he was, trekking through the snow, battling the adverse weather conditions because his damned alpha had gotten it into his head, stealing a female from the cougars as revenge for waking his pride from their winter sleep was a grand plan. Gods, Lowe should have told him to take her back the second Saint had marched into the ridge with her. He had wanted to, but Saint was his alpha, and he was a good one. The big male had taken care of him and Knox, had provided a home for them when they had badly needed one, and had brought them into the pride. A pride that might be makeshift, mostly filled with bears gathered from various clans, but it was a pride nonetheless. A family. One that felt as if it was stronger and meant more to those in it because it was made up of bears who had come together to live as a group. The bond between him and Saint and Maverick and Rune felt stronger than the bonds he'd had with bears who had been part of his old pride, ones tied together by blood and tradition. Those bonds had been flimsy, had snapped with only the slightest pressure, leaving him and Knox without a home. A home they had found with Saint and the others. A family that shared a powerful bond that felt unbreakable. He would do anything for the males in his pride, and he knew they would do anything for him. And that's why he was freezing his ass off, trekking to a remote lodge. Saint needed him to do this, and so he would do it. "Think maybe we have any butter in the freezer?" Lowe's mouth watered as he thought about a nice, perfectly cooked ribeye brushed with butter and cracked black peppercorns. Knox chuckled again, the warm sound soothing Lowe. His brother's mood was improving, even if the weather wasn't. He gritted his teeth and braced as a blast of icy wind battered him, dug his heavy boots in to keep himself upright. When it passed, he brushed the snow off his black jacket and trudged onwards. "Typical of you to think about the food first." Knox jabbed him on his arm. "I was thinking about whiskey. Aren't you always?" Lowe slid him a look, grinned at him. "Bourbon glaze might be nice. Oh, gods. Honey and bourbon glazed steak." Knox smacked his lips together, his blue eyes losing their focus as a dreamy look crossed his face. Knox had never been able to resist either honey or what he called the dark nectar of the gods. Once, one particularly fine and long summer back when they had been younger, he had witnessed Knox in his bear form running from a swarm of bees with half a hive stuck on his head and chunks of honey flying from him in all directions. He had never let his brother live that one down. He had honestly never seen anything funnier than a 500-plus-pound grizzly thundering along a wooded riverbank, trying to outrun angry bees. "You know, I can practically feel you thinking about it. Quit it," Knox growled in his direction. Lowe fought the smile that wanted to curve his lips as his brother glared at him, pulled a face and tugged his black scarf up to his nose when he couldn't hold back the smile any longer. "2 honey and bourbon glazed steaks coming right up." Lowe patted his brother on his back again, hoping he wouldn't hold on to his bad mood. "Make it 4. Knox rubbed his stomach through his own black winter jacket. "I'll be fiendishly hungry by the time we get there." Knox was always fiendishly hungry. It was a good job Lowe loved cooking as much as he did. His brother had one hell of an appetite. It dawned on him that his uneasy feeling had passed thanks to losing himself in conversation, and tried to think of another topic to keep his mind occupied, other than Knox and the bees. Food stuck in his head, tormenting him, keeping his pace brisk despite the slippery ground. "I probably should have thought a few sakes for Saint." He glanced at Knox, whose look said it all. Saint hadn't exactly been in the mood to have them sticking around, though. Had wanted them gone because Knox had scared the female. "What happened back there?" Lowe rubbed his hands together, trying to get some warmth into them. His gloves were good, but apparently not that good. The tips of his fingers were already cold. Knox shrugged and growled. Saint chewed me a new one. Probably should have asked you to watch the female." "Yeah, well, I probably would have let her escape." Lowe felt his brother's gaze on the side of his face, pushed his woolen hat back, and ran a hand over his short blonde hair as he sighed. It doesn't sit well with me." "Always the gentleman." Knox took another jab at his arm and grinned at him, flashing straight white teeth. "Mom always said you were the nice one out of the two of us, and I was too much like Dad." They both fell silent at that. When that silence became too thick, started to feel as if it was choking him, Lowe forced a sigh and tilted his head back, gazing up through the canopy to the gray sky. "I miss them." Knox wrapped his arm around Lowe's shoulders and tugged him towards him. "Me too." Lowe lifted his left hand and patted his brother's gloved hand. It had been hard for both of them when they had lost their parents. Things had changed at their old pride on the coast just north of Vancouver, and they had ended up striking out on their own, trying to find a place that felt like home to them. They thought they had found it in a small cabin they had built near a lake, had settled there, and things had been good for a while. Until they had been out in their bear forms, and Knox had been shot by hunters. They had shifted back and had run as far as Knox could manage. When his brother hadn't been able to keep going, had collapsed and terrified Lowe, Lowe had started dragging him, trying to get him to help. Lowe's throat closed as he remembered finding himself at a point where two valleys converged, sitting with his brother and too tired to keep moving. He could still recall how it had felt to sit there looking at Knox, sure he was going to die. And then Saint had appeared. Lowe had attacked him, hadn't been able to stop himself from shifting into his animal form to protect his brother, even though he had sensed Saint was a bear too. When Saint had offered to help save Knox, Lowe had been more than grateful. Saint had helped him move Knox to Black Ridge, had set them up in a cabin, and had let them stay there until his brother had healed and was back at full strength. And then, just when Lowe and Knox had decided it was time they moved on, even when neither of them had wanted to, the big bear had offered them both a place in his pride. They owed Saint everything, but somehow the male didn't make them feel like they did. He had never treated them as if they owed him anything, rarely pulled rank on them, and always took care of them. From day one, Saint had made them feel as if they belonged in his pride, as if Black Ridge had always been their home, and as if they had always known each other. "You're awfully quiet." Knox nudged him as they reached an area where the trees were sparse and the snow was deeper. Lowe couldn't stop himself from glancing at Knox's right shoulder. His brother's blue eyes widened slightly. Winter silence making you all contemplative? Or is this because Saint gave me a spanking for upsetting the female?" Lowe shrugged. "I'm going to blame the cold. Must be freezing my brain and making me sentimental." Knox scoffed at that. "You don't need the cold for that to happen. For a big bear, you're a big softy. You know that?" He wanted to deny that, but their mother had been right about him. Lowe was the gentler one out of the two of them, and sometimes he wished it wasn't the case, like the times he got his heart broken. Knox had never had his heart broken, Knox could somehow roll into town or Vancouver, find a female to fool around with to blow off some steam, and escape with his...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?